For 30 years, Marcus stood at his post. 30 years of silence. 30 years of watching, listening, and never speaking. But on a cold Tuesday morning in November, he walked into the palace administration office and placed his resignation letter on the desk. No explanation. No farewell speech. Just a single sentence scribbled at the bottom. I can no longer carry what I know. The palace erupted in whispers. Marcus was a legend among the royal guards. He had served 3 generations. He knew every corridor, every secret passage, every face that came and went in the dead of night. And now he was gone. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat across from a journalist named Sarah in a small cafe 300 miles from the capital. His hands trembled as he held his coffee cup. His eyes, once sharp and alert, now carried the weight of something heavy, something he had buried for too long. Before we start, Sarah said gently, are you sure you want to do this? Marcus nodded slowly. I have to. If I don't, I'll die with this secret, and that would make me just as guilty as them. If you want to hear stories that reveal the truth hidden behind closed doors, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Marcus took a deep breath. It was March 15th. 15 years ago, I was assigned to the night shift in the East Wing, the king's private quarters. Sarah leaned forward. The East Wing. That was where the king had fallen ill. The illness that changed everything. That night, Marcus continued, I was told to stand outside the king's study. No one in, no one out. Standard protocol. When he worked late, he paused, his jaw tightening. But at 2:47 a.m., I heard voices. Raised voices. Then something crashed. Glass breaking. What did you do? Sarah asked. Nothing. I stood there. That was my job. To stand and not ask questions. His voice cracked. But then the door opened. And I saw him. The king. No. Marcus looked directly at Sarah. The king's younger brother. Prince Edward. He was sweating. His tie was loose. And his hands. Marcus stopped, closing his eyes. His hands were shaking. Sarah's pen hovered over her notebook. Prince Edward. The man who became regent when the king fell into a coma that very night? The man who now controlled everything? He looked at me, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. And he said, the king has taken ill. Call the doctor. Tell no one else. Then he walked away fast, like he was running from something. And the king. Marcus's face went pale. I went inside. I had to. I found him collapsed on the floor. There was a glass on his desk, half empty. And the smell. He shook his head. It smelled wrong. Bitter. Like almonds. The cafe suddenly felt colder. Sarah knew that smell. Anyone who had studied poisons knew that smell. Marcus, she said carefully, are you saying what I think you're saying? He met her eyes. I'm saying that night something happened in that room. Something that wasn't an illness. And I saw who walked out just before the king collapsed. Why didn't you say anything? Why wait 15 years? Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Because 2 days after that night, another guard asked questions. A young man named Thomas. He wondered why the prince had been in the king's study so late. Why the doctor's report seemed strange? Marcus's voice broke. 3 weeks later, Thomas died in a car accident. Brake failure, they said. No, the message was clear. Speak up, and accidents happen. But that's not the only reason I stayed quiet, Marcus admitted. There's something else. Something I saw at 3 a.m. that night. After the king was taken away, after everyone left, Sarah waited. Her heart pounded. Someone else came to the study. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who picked up that glass, wiped it clean, and took it away. Marcus looked out the window. That's the part that's haunted me for 15 years. Because the person I saw, he turned back to Sarah, someone I never expected. Someone everyone trusts. Asterisk Sarah's recorder sat on the table between them, the red light blinking steadily. Marcus stared at it for a long moment before continuing. Her name was Margaret. The king's personal secretary. She'd been with him for 20 years. Everyone loved her. She was like family. And she took the glass. Marcus nodded. I watched from the shadows. The study door was still open. I'd stepped back when I heard footsteps, and I saw her slip inside. She was wearing gloves. Thin ones, the kind doctors use. She picked up the glass with a handkerchief, looked around, and left through the servants' passage. Did she see you? No, I made sure of that. By then, I knew something was very wrong. And I knew that staying invisible might keep me alive. Sarah wrote quickly. What happened after that night? Marcus's expression darkened. The official story came fast. Too fast. The king had suffered a sudden stroke. A tragic medical emergency. He fell into a coma and never woke up. Prince Edward became regent. Margaret stayed at her post, running the office as she always had. And he paused. I kept watch. Every single day. Waiting, watching, for what? For proof. For someone else to notice what I'd noticed. For justice. His voice turned bitter, but it never came. Instead, I watched Prince Edward take control. I watched him change laws, move money, arrange marriages for his own children to powerful families. And through it all, Margaret remained by his side. The loyal secretary, the trusted advisor. Sarah set down her pen. Marcus, if what you're saying is true, we're talking about murder, conspiracy, treason. I know. His voice was steady now, resolved. That's why I'm here. That's why I can finally speak. What changed? Why now? Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph. Old, faded, but clear enough. It showed Prince Edward and Margaret standing close together in what looked like a garden. The prince's hand was on her shoulder. They were both smiling. But it wasn't the smile of an employer and employee. It was something else. Something intimate. I took this 6 months before the king fell ill, Marcus said. I was doing routine security sweeps of the grounds. I saw them together, and I realized they'd been having an affair for years. Right under everyone's noses, pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind. An affair, a king who might have discovered the truth, a convenient illness, a loyal secretary who helped cover it up. There's more, Marcus said quietly. Last month, Margaret retired. After 40 years of service, she suddenly left. No ceremony, no farewell. She just disappeared, moved to a villa in the south of France. Very expensive. Very private. You think she was paid off? I think she was being moved somewhere safe. Away from questions? Away from anyone who might start digging into the past. Marcus leaned forward. But here's what really made me come forward. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter. No return address. Just 2 sentences. You saw what happened. Your silence ends when you retire. Choose wisely. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone knows you were there that night. Someone's always known, Marcus said. But for 30 years, as long as I wore that uniform, I was protected by my silence. I was part of the system. But now that I've resigned, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. You're in danger. We both are now, Marcus said, looking directly at her. But I'm old. I've lived my life, and I can't die knowing I let them get away with this. The king was a good man. He deserved better than being poisoned in his own home by his own brother. Sarah's mind raced. This was bigger than she'd imagined, but it was also dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. I need more, she said. The photograph is compelling, but it's not enough. We need something concrete. Something that proves the king didn't die of natural causes. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. That's why I saved this. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was a key. Old and brass, with an ornate design. What is it? The key to the king's private safe. The one in his study. The one only he was supposed to have. Marcus's eyes were hard. I took it that night. After Margaret left, after they took the king away, I went back into the study and I found it on the floor. It had fallen during the struggle. Struggle? Sarah's breath caught. You said he collapsed. He did. But before that, there was a fight. I heard it. Furniture moving. Voices shouting. The king didn't go down without resistance. Marcus's voice shook with emotion. I should have gone in then. I should have helped him. But I was trained to follow orders, to never interfere, and that training killed him. Tears welled in the old guard's eyes. 15 years of guilt poured out in that moment. Sarah asked gently. I don't know. I never opened it. But I kept the key. I kept it because I knew that one day someone would need to see what the king was protecting, what he died trying to keep safe. Sarah looked at the key. It represented everything. Evidence, truth, justice, but also risk. Whoever opened that safe would become a target. The safe is still there? She asked. Marcus nodded. The study was sealed after the king's death, turned into a memorial. No one goes in anymore. But I know the security rotations. I know the access codes. I can get us in. When? Tonight? After midnight? When the palace is quiet? He met her eyes. This is your last chance to walk away. But Sarah knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after hearing this. I'm in, she said. Marcus's expression softened with something like relief. Or maybe regret. Then may God have mercy on us both. The palace looked different at night. The grand stone walls that gleamed gold in daylight now loomed gray and cold under the moon. Sarah stood in the shadows beside Marcus, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd covered dangerous stories before, but this felt different. This felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. The east gate, Marcus whispered. The guards change shift at 12:15. We have exactly 8 minutes while the new team does their first sweep of the perimeter. That's our window. Sarah nodded, too nervous to speak. She checked her phone. 12:12 a.m. Once we're inside, stay close to me. No lights, no phones. The security cameras in the memorial wing were disabled years ago out of respect, but there are motion sensors. I know where they are. How do you know all this if you've been retired for 2 weeks? Marcus gave her a sad smile. Because I helped install them. And because some of the guards still talk to me. They don't know why I'm asking. They just think I'm a sentimental old man missing his post. 12:14 a.m. Marcus moved forward, and Sarah followed. They slipped through the east gate just as the old guard left his position. The garden path was gravel, and each step sounded impossibly loud in Sarah's ears. She focused on Marcus's back, matching his movements exactly. They reached a side door. Marcus produced another key and unlocked it smoothly. The door opened without a sound. He'd oiled the hinges, Sarah realized. He'd been planning this inside. The palace was dark and silent. The air smelled of old wood and furniture polish. Marcus led her through a series of corridors, each turn purposeful and confident. He knew this place like his own heartbeat. They climbed a narrow staircase. At the top, Marcus paused. Ahead was a set of ornate double doors with a golden plaque in memory of King Alexander III. This is it, Marcus breathed. The study. He pulled out a security card. Where had he gotten it? Sarah didn't ask. Some questions were better left unanswered. He swiped it and the doors clicked open. The study was frozen in time. Books lined the walls. A large desk sat by the window. Everything was exactly as it had been 15 years ago, preserved like a museum exhibit. Sarah felt like she was stepping into a tomb. Marcus closed the doors behind them, finally allowed himself to turn on a small flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the desk. The safe is behind the portrait, he said, pointing to a large painting of the king's father. Help me move it. Together, they carefully lifted the portrait off the wall. Behind it was a small safe, just as Marcus had said. He pulled out the brass key, his hand shaking slightly. This is it, he said. Once we open this, there's no going back. Sarah put her hand on his shoulder. We've already crossed that line. Marcus nodded and inserted the key. It turned smoothly. The safe door swung open. Inside were several items. A leather journal, a stack of letters bound with string, and a small glass vial, empty but labeled with a handwritten tag. Marcus picked up the vial carefully. Even in the dim light, they could read the tag. Sample March 15th, from desk glass, do not destroy. Sarah's breath caught. He knew. The king knew he'd been poisoned. Marcus opened the journal with trembling fingers. The last entry was dated March 15th, the night the king fell ill. Sarah shone her phone light on the page, and they read together, I can no longer ignore what is before me. Edward and Margaret believe I am blind, but I have seen them. I have seen the secret accounts. The money being moved. The plans being made. Tonight, I confronted Edward. I told him I know about the affair. I know about the embezzlement. I know everything. He begged for mercy. He said it would destroy the family. I told him he has 1 week to confess publicly, or I will do it myself. He left angry. Margaret brought me tea to calm my nerves, but the taste was wrong, bitter. I've kept a sample. If something happens to me, let this journal be the truth. Edward and Margaret. The entry ended there, unfinished. The king had collapsed while writing. Marcus sat down heavily in the king's chair. He was trying to protect us. Even while dying, he was thinking about the evidence, about the truth. Sarah photographed every page of the journal, every letter. The letters detailed the affair, the embezzlement scheme, and the king's discovery of it all. They were written in Margaret's handwriting, addressed to Edward. Love letters mixed with financial calculations and plans for a future together. This is everything we need, Sarah said. This proves it was murder. This proves they conspired together. Not quite, Marcus said quietly. We have the king's suspicions. We have evidence of an affair and financial crimes. But the vial is empty. Without testing the actual poison, they'll claim the king was paranoid, sick, confused. They'll say the journal is the ramblings of a man having a stroke. Sarah's heart sank. He was right. Defense lawyers would tear this apart. They needed more. Wait, Marcus said suddenly. He stood and walked to the desk. He ran his fingers along the underside of the drawer. When I was young, my father taught me that powerful men always keep insurance. Real insurance. Hidden where only they can find it. His fingers found something. A click echoed in the quiet room. A secret compartment popped open beneath the drawer. Inside was a small flash drive. Marcus held it up to the light. This wasn't here when I checked that night. The king must have hidden it earlier. Before the confrontation. Sarah's hands shook as she took the drive. We need to see what's on it. Not here. Too risky. We need to leave now. Carefully put everything back except the drive, the journal, and the letters. Marcus took the empty vial as well. Even empty, it could be tested for residue. They were about to leave when they heard it. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy, purposeful. Coming closer. Marcus killed the flashlight instantly. They froze in the darkness. The footsteps stopped right outside the study doors. Someone was out there. Someone knew they were inside. Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. Marcus moved silently to stand beside the door, positioning himself like the guard he'd been for 30 years. He picked up a heavy bookend from a nearby shelf. The door handle began to turn. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. The door opened slowly, and a figure stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, holding something in their hand. I knew you'd come, a voice said in the darkness. A woman's voice. Familiar. Marcus turned on his flashlight, pointing it directly at the intruder's face. Sarah gasped. Standing in the doorway, looking older but unmistakable, was Margaret. The former secretary smiled coldly. Hello, Marcus. It's been a long time. In her hand was a gun. Margaret stepped fully into the study and closed the door behind her with her free hand. The gun remained steady, pointed at Marcus. She looked different from the photographs Sarah had seen. Her hair was shorter, gray now, instead of brown. Lines creased her face. But her eyes were the same, sharp, cold, calculating. "Put down the bookend, Marcus," she said calmly. "We both know you won't use it. You've never been a violent man. That's why you survived so long." Marcus slowly lowered the bookend, but didn't set it down. "How did you know we'd be here?" "Because I know you. I've always known you." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You were there that night. I saw your shadow in the hallway after I left. I wondered for years if you'd seen me. When you resigned, I knew the answer." Sarah found her voice. "You sent him the letter?" "The threat," warning Margaret corrected. "I sent him a warning. Out of respect for his years of service, I gave him a choice. Stay quiet and live out his retirement in peace." But Marcus never was good at making the smart choice, was he? The smart choice? Marcus's voice shook with anger. "The king was a good man. You and Edward murdered him. For what? Money? Power? An affair?" Margaret's expression flickered. Something like pain crossed her face before hardening again. "You don't understand. You never could. You saw what you wanted to see. A loyal king. A wicked brother. A scheming secretary. But the truth is always more complicated." "Then tell us the truth," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If we're wrong, explain it. The journal, the affair, the poison. Explain all of it." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. The gun never wavered, but something shifted in her posture. She looked tired, ancient, like she'd been carrying a weight for too long. "The affair was real," she finally said. "Edward and I loved each other. We'd been together for 10 years. But Alexander never knew. He never suspected. The journal says he confronted Edward that night," Marcus said. "He did. But not about the affair." Margaret's voice dropped. "He confronted Edward about the money, about the accounts. And Edward panicked. He came to me in tears saying Alexander was going to destroy him, going to expose everything. But I told him to calm down. I told him I'd handle it. By poisoning the king," Sarah said. "No," Margaret's voice was sharp. "I didn't poison anyone. I brought Alexander tea, yes. Like I did every night he worked late. But there was nothing in it. Nothing but tea and honey, the way he liked it." Marcus stared at her. "You're lying. The king wrote that the taste was wrong. He kept a sample. The king was paranoid that night, upset, angry. He'd just had a terrible argument with his brother. His mind was playing tricks on him." Margaret's jaw tightened. "What happened to Alexander was a stroke, a real stroke. The doctors confirmed it. Doctors who were paid by Prince Edward," Sarah said. "Doctors who had everything to lose if they questioned the official story." "You think you know everything because you have that journal," Margaret said. "But you don't know what happened after Alexander collapsed. You don't know what I did? You took the glass," Marcus said. "You cleaned it. You destroyed the evidence." "I took the glass because I was scared," Margaret snapped. For the first time, her composure cracked. "I came back to the study to check on Alexander. Edward had called me frantic, saying something was wrong. When I arrived, Alexander was on the floor, unconscious, and that glass was sitting on his desk with a note beside it." Sarah's breath caught. "What note?" Margaret's hand trembled slightly. The gun dipped. It said, "If you're reading this, I'm dead or dying. The tea was poisoned. Edward and Margaret are responsible. This glass contains evidence. But I knew there was nothing wrong with that tea. I'd made it myself." "I drunk from the same pot." "So you destroyed it," Marcus said bitterly. "You destroyed the evidence to protect yourself." "I destroyed it because I knew it was a setup," Margaret said, her voice rising. "Don't you see? Someone wanted us to look guilty. Someone poisoned Alexander and made sure the blame would fall on Edward and me." The room fell silent. Sarah's mind raced. Could it be true? Could Margaret be telling the truth? "Why should we believe you?" Marcus asked. "Because I loved Alexander too," Margaret said quietly. "Before Edward. Before everything. Alexander and I." She stopped, her eyes glistening. "We had an affair 25 years ago. Brief. Secret. It ended when he married the queen. But I never stopped caring about him. never stopped serving him. And when I fell in love with Edward, it was complicated, messy, but I never wanted Alexander dead. Sarah studied Margaret's face. The pain there seemed real, but so did the desperation. If you didn't poison him, who did? Sarah asked. I don't know, Margaret admitted, but I've spent 15 years trying to figure it out. Why do you think I stayed in that palace so long? Why do you think I accepted Edward's protection, his money, his silence? Because I was trying to find out who really killed Alexander. And I think I finally know. Marcus lowered the bookend completely. Who? Margaret looked at the gun in her hand as if she'd forgotten she was holding it. She slowly lowered it. The Queen. Alexander's wife. Queen Elizabeth. Sarah felt the world tilt. The Queen? The beloved grieving widow who'd worn black for 15 years. You're insane, Marcus breathed. Am I? Think about it. Who benefited most from Alexander's death? Not Edward. He became regent, yes, but he was always under scrutiny. Always suspected. His power was conditional, temporary, until the prince came of age. But Elizabeth. Margaret's voice turned hard. She became the eternal victim. The tragic widow. Untouchable. Beyond suspicion. And she controlled the fortune. The real fortune. The one Alexander inherited from his grandmother. The one that could never be touched by scandal or investigation. Why would she kill her own husband? Sarah asked. Because he was going to divorce her, Margaret said. I found letters, hidden in Elizabeth's private papers. Alexander had discovered she'd been having an affair with his best friend, the Duke of Rothwell. Alexander was going to expose them both, divorce her, cut her off. She would have lost everything. Her title, her children's inheritance, her position. Marcus shook his head. This is too much. First you say it was Edward and you. Then you say it wasn't. Now you're saying it was the Queen. How are we supposed to believe any of this? Margaret reached into her coat pocket slowly. Marcus tensed, but she pulled out a USB drive. Similar to the one Sarah had found in the desk? Because I have proof, Margaret said. I copied Alexander's files. His private investigation into Elizabeth's affair. His evidence. His plans. Everything. She held out the drive. Take it. Compare it to whatever you found in that safe. You'll see I'm telling the truth. Sarah stepped forward cautiously and took the drive from Margaret's hand. Why give this to us? Sarah asked. Why help us? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm dying. Lung cancer. Stage 4. I have maybe 3 months. And I can't die knowing that woman is still out there. Still playing the victim. Still honored and loved while Alexander's real killer walks free. She looked at Marcus. I'm sorry I threatened you. I was trying to protect Edward. Trying to keep him safe. But I realize now that the truth needs to come out. All of it. Even if it destroys me too. Marcus stood frozen, processing everything. 15 years of certainty crumbling. There's one more thing you need to know, Margaret said. The Queen knows you're here. I'm not the only one watching Marcus. She's had people following him since he retired. She'll be coming soon. You need to leave now, as if on cue. They heard sounds in the distance. Doors opening, voices, footsteps, multiple people moving through the palace. Go, Margaret urged. I'll buy you time. What will you do? Sarah asked. Margaret smiled sadly. What I should have done 15 years ago. Tell the truth. She turned and walked out of the study, closing the door behind her. They heard her voice in the hallway, loud and commanding, drawing the attention away from them. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. There's another way out. Through the servants' passage. Come on, they ran. Marcus led Sarah through a hidden door behind a bookshelf. The passage was narrow and dark, smelling of dust and decay. They moved quickly, Sarah's hand on Marcus's shoulder to keep from getting lost in the blackness. Behind them, they could hear shouting. Margaret's voice rising above the others, defiant and clear. You have no authority here anymore. I am Margaret Thorne. I served this palace for 40 years. If you want to arrest me, you'll need more than palace guards. The voices grew distant as Marcus and Sarah descended a steep staircase. Sarah's phone provided the only light, casting strange shadows on the stone walls. The passage seemed endless, winding deeper into the palace's foundations. Where does this lead? Sarah whispered. The old chapel. It hasn't been used in decades. From there, we can reach the gardens and the north gate. They emerged into a small, forgotten chapel. Moonlight streamed through broken stained glass windows. Dust covered everything. Marcus moved to a side door and tested it. Locked. He pulled out his collection of keys, trying several before one finally turned. The gardens were silver in the moonlight. They could see the north wall ahead, maybe 200 yards away. So close. Wait, Marcus said, grabbing Sarah's arm. He pointed to the wall. 2 figures stood there, guards, not palace security. Something else. Private contractors, maybe. The kind who didn't wear uniforms and didn't follow rules? The Queen's people, Marcus breathed. Margaret was right. They're watching every exit. Sarah's mind raced. They had the evidence. The journals. The USB drives. The empty vial. But none of it mattered if they couldn't get out of here alive. Is there another way? She asked. Marcus thought for a moment. One, but it's risky. The old drainage tunnel. It runs under the wall to the river. But it might be flooded. Or collapsed. I haven't been down there in 20 years. Show me. They moved through the gardens, staying low behind hedges and statues. The drainage entrance was hidden behind a false stone and a decorative wall. Marcus found it from memory, pressing the right spot. The stones swung inward, revealing a dark hole. The smell hit them immediately. Stagnant water and mold. Marcus shone his light down. The tunnel was partially flooded, water reaching about knee-height. We'll have to wade through, he said. Keep your phone and the drives above water. If anything happens to that evidence, this was all for nothing. Sarah sealed her phone and the USB drives in a plastic bag from her pocket. They climbed down into the cold water. It was worse than it looked. The water was ice cold, and the bottom was slippery with algae. They moved slowly, Marcus leading with his flashlight. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Sarah's legs went numb from the cold. Water dripped from the ceiling. Somewhere ahead, she could hear the river. Almost there, Marcus said. Just another. The flashlight beam caught something ahead. A figure standing in the tunnel. Blocking their path, they froze. The figure stepped into the light. It was a woman. Older, elegant despite standing in knee-deep water. She wore a long coat and boots. Her face was familiar from 1,000 photographs and news reports. Queen Elizabeth. Hello, Marcus, the Queen said calmly. Did you really think you could walk out of my palace with stolen property? Marcus positioned himself in front of Sarah. Hey, those aren't your documents. They belong to your husband. The man you murdered. The Queen's expression didn't change. I murdered no one. Alexander died of natural causes. A stroke. Witnessed by doctors. Confirmed by autopsy. Doctors you paid. An autopsy you controlled. Careful, Marcus. You're speaking treason. I'm speaking truth, Marcus said. His voice echoed in the tunnel. You killed Alexander because he discovered your affair. Because he was going to divorce you. Margaret told us everything. The Queen laughed. It was a cold sound. Margaret. Poor, delusional Margaret. Did she tell you she was the one having the affair? That she and Edward had been stealing from the crown for years? That Alexander discovered them and they panicked? She gave us evidence, Sarah said, finding her voice. Proof of your affair with the Duke of Rothwell. Fabrications. Margaret is a skilled forger. She's had 15 years to create whatever narrative suits her needs. The Queen took a step forward. Give me the drives. The journal. All of it. Walk away now, and you can live. Continue down this path, and you'll both meet with unfortunate accidents. Just like poor Thomas. Marcus's jaw tightened at the mention of Thomas, the guard who died asking questions. You ordered his death, Marcus said. I protected the crown. I protected my children. I protected the stability of this nation. The Queen's voice hardened. Alexander was going to destroy everything. Not because of any affair, real or imagined, but because he'd become paranoid, unstable. He was seeing conspiracies everywhere, accusing everyone. Edward, Margaret, me, his own doctors. He was a danger to himself and to the monarchy. "So you decided he had to die," Sarah said. "I decided he needed to rest. I gave him something to help him sleep, to calm his mind. How was I to know he'd have a stroke? How was I to predict his weak constitution would fail?" There it was, the admission, spoken so casually, as if it were nothing. Sarah's hand was in her pocket, wrapped around her phone. Still recording? Everything. Every word. "You poisoned him," Marcus said. "You admit it." "Gave my husband medicine, prescribed by his doctor, for his own good. That he had an adverse reaction is tragic. But it's not murder. The law will decide that," Sarah said. The Queen smiled. "The law? Dear girl, I am the law. Do you think anyone will believe you? A disgraced guard and a second-rate journalist? Against the word of the crown? Against doctors and official reports in 15 years of established history?" She held out her hand. "The evidence. Now." Marcus looked at Sarah. In that moment, they both understood. The Queen would never let them leave this tunnel alive. Not with what they knew. Not with what they'd recorded. "Run," Marcus whispered to Sarah. Then louder to the Queen, "You want the evidence? Come get it." He threw the journal at the Queen's feet into the water. As she instinctively looked down, Marcus lunged forward, tackling her. "Go!" he screamed at Sarah. "Get out!" "Tell everyone." Sarah ran. Behind her, she heard splashing, grunting, the sound of a struggle. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Marcus had given her this chance. She had to take it. The tunnel opened ahead. She could see moonlight. The river, freedom. She burst out of the tunnel and into the night air. The river was there, cold and dark. She could hear shouting behind her. Guards were coming. She had seconds. Sarah jumped into the river. The current was strong, pulling her away from the palace. She swam hard, fighting to keep her head above water, her bag held high. She heard a splash behind her. Someone had followed her in. She swam harder, her lungs burning. She made it to the far bank and pulled herself out, gasping. Looking back, she saw lights along the palace wall. Searchlights. They were looking for her, but she'd made it. She was alive, and she had the evidence. She ran into the night, water streaming from her clothes, the drive safe in her bag. Behind her, the palace lights blazed against the darkness. And somewhere in that tunnel, Marcus had made his final stand. Sarah didn't stop running until she reached her car, parked miles away where she'd left it that morning. She started the engine with shaking hands and drove. Away from the palace, away from the Queen, toward the nearest city, toward safety. She had to get this evidence public. Fast. Before the Queen's people found her. Before they silenced her, like they'd silenced Thomas, like they'd probably silenced Marcus. Tears streamed down her face as she drove. Marcus had sacrificed everything. For the truth, for justice, for a king who died 15 years ago. She couldn't let that sacrifice be for nothing. The question was, who could she trust? Where could she go? The Queen's influence reached far. Her money reached farther. Anyone Sarah approached might already be compromised, bought, threatened, controlled, but she had to try. She had to believe that somewhere someone still cared about the truth. As dawn broke over the horizon, Sarah pulled into a small town she didn't recognize. She found an internet cafe, paid cash, and sat at the furthest computer in the back. She uploaded everything. The journals, the photographs, the recordings. All of it. To multiple servers, multiple locations. Cloud storage, anonymous email addresses, dark websites. Everywhere she could think of. If they killed her now, the evidence would still exist. Still spread, still expose the truth. She posted the recordings on social media. sent the files to every major news organization, every journalist she knew, every media outlet in the country. Within an hour, the story began to break. Headlines exploded across the internet. Queen implicated in king's death, royal conspiracy exposed, palace in crisis. The queen's people would come for her now. She knew that. But the truth was out. It couldn't be stopped. Couldn't be buried. Couldn't be controlled. Sarah sat back in her chair, exhausted, soaking wet, afraid, but alive. And for the first time in 15 years, King Alexander's story was finally being told. The world moved fast once the truth was out. By noon, the story had gone viral. Millions of people were reading the documents, listening to the recordings, seeing the evidence. The Queen's confession in that tunnel, captured on Sarah's phone, played on every news station across the globe. I gave my husband medicine. How was I to know he'd have a stroke? Those words destroyed 15 years of lies in seconds. The palace released a statement denying everything. They called it a hoax, forgeries, a conspiracy by enemies of the crown. But the evidence was too strong, too detailed, too real. Experts verified the handwriting in the journals. Voice analysts confirmed the recording was genuine. Documents were cross-referenced and authenticated. Within 24 hours, protests erupted outside the palace gates. Thousands of people demanding justice, demanding answers, demanding the Queen step down. Sarah watched it all from a safe house provided by her news agency. Security guards stood outside. Lawyers surrounded her. Everyone wanted her story. Everyone wanted interviews. But she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. On the second day, news came. They'd found a body in the drainage tunnel. Male, elderly. Multiple injuries consistent with a struggle. Sarah broke down. She'd known. Deep down, she'd known Marcus wouldn't make it out. But hearing it confirmed was different. He'd given his life for this. For the truth. For justice, the funeral was held a week later. Small, private. But hundreds of guards attended in civilian clothes. They'd heard what Marcus did, what he sacrificed, and they honored him. Sarah stood at the back of the church, watching as they carried his casket out. She'd written the story. She'd exposed the truth. But Marcus was the real hero. He always had been. The investigation moved quickly after that. Prince Edward was arrested, charged with embezzlement and conspiracy. He confessed within hours, broken by the weight of 15 years of guilt. Yes, he'd stolen from the crown. Yes, he'd had an affair with Margaret, but he swore he never poisoned his brother. Never wanted him dead. Margaret was found in her villa in France. She was indeed dying of cancer, just as she'd said. In her final interview before she passed, she maintained her innocence in the poisoning. She admitted to taking the glass, destroying evidence, and protecting Edward. But she insisted she never harmed Alexander, never would have. I loved him once, she said, her voice weak. And even after that love changed. Even after I fell for Edward, I never stopped respecting Alexander. He was a good king. He deserved better than what happened to him. She died 2 weeks after giving that interview. Some said it was a mercy. Others said it was too easy an escape. The Queen was the hardest to prosecute. She had resources, power, the best lawyers money could buy. They argued that her confession was coerced, that she was defending herself in that tunnel, that she was speaking hypothetically, not admitting guilt. But the evidence was overwhelming. The medical examiner reopened Alexander's case. New tests were run on samples that had been preserved. Toxicology found traces of a sedative in the king's blood, one that, in high doses, could trigger strokes in people with certain genetic markers. Alexander had those markers. The Queen had access to the medication. She'd been the one to bring him his evening tea. The trial lasted 6 months. The world watched. Every day brought new revelations. The Duke of Rothwell confirmed the affair, hoping for leniency. The doctors who'd signed off on the original death certificate admitted had been pressured, paid, threatened. Palace staff came forward with stories of the Queen's temper, her control, her obsession with protecting her position. One servant testified that the queen had researched sedatives weeks before the king's death, asking about medications that might help someone sleep deeply. In the end, the jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty. Guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of obstruction of justice. The queen showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She simply stood, straight-backed and regal, even in defeat, and accepted her fate. She was sentenced to life in prison. No parole, no mercy. The same mercy she'd shown her husband. As they led her away, she looked at Sarah, who sat in the gallery. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Sarah saw something there. Not remorse. Not shame. Just cold acceptance. The queen had gambled everything and lost. The monarchy survived, barely. Alexander's son, now 23, was crowned king in a somber ceremony. He gave a speech about truth, justice, and rebuilding trust. He promised to honor his father's memory by ruling with integrity. The new king's first act was to posthumously award Marcus the highest civilian honor, the Medal of Truth. He called Marcus a hero, a man who sacrificed everything so that justice could prevail. Sarah accepted the medal on Marcus's behalf. She placed it on his grave, along with a letter. "You were right," she wrote. "The truth mattered. It always matters. Thank you for showing me that. Thank you for being brave when I was afraid. Thank you for giving everything so that a good man's story could finally be told. Rest easy, Marcus. The king can rest easy too." Justice was served. She stood there for a long time, the wind rustling through the cemetery trees. She thought about that night in the cafe when Marcus first sat across from her. How frightened he'd looked. How burdened. But also how determined. How resolved. He'd carried that secret for 30 years, and when the time came, he'd done what was right, even knowing it would cost him everything. Sarah visited the palace one last time, months after the trial. The new king had invited her. He wanted to thank her personally, to show her something. He led her to the study. Alexander's study. It had been restored, but this time as a true memorial. Not a frozen lie, but an honest tribute. On the wall was a new portrait. Not of Alexander alone, but of Alexander and Marcus together. The king and the guard. Both men who'd served their country. Both men who'd paid the ultimate price for truth. "I never knew Marcus," the young king said, "but I know what he did. My father would have been grateful. He believed in loyalty, and honor, in people who stood up for what was right, no matter the cost." He handed Sarah a leather-bound book. Inside were letters, written by Alexander. To his son, to be opened if anything happened to him. He knew, Sarah breathed. He knew he was in danger. He suspected. But he never stopped trying to do the right thing. Even at the end. The king's eyes were wet. "I want to publish these. Let people see who my father really was. Not the tragic victim. Not the paranoid king my mother painted him to be, but the good man who tried to fight corruption, even in his own family." Sarah helped him publish the letters. They showed Alexander as he truly was. Flawed, human, sometimes too trusting. But fundamentally decent. A man who believed in truth and justice and was killed because of it. The letters became a bestseller. The proceeds went to a foundation in Marcus's name, supporting whistleblowers, protecting people who spoke truth to power, making sure that others wouldn't have to wait 30 years to come forward. Sarah continued to write, but she never forgot that case. How close the truth came to dying in that tunnel. How easily it could have been buried forever. She gave talks at journalism schools, told students about Marcus, about the importance of protecting sources, of listening to the people who risk everything to tell their stories. "Truth takes courage," she'd say, "both to speak it and to report it. Marcus taught me that. He gave his life for it. And because of him, a 15-year lie was finally exposed. A good king's name was cleared, and justice, delayed as it was, finally came." Years passed. The scandal faded from headlines. The monarchy rebuilt. The Queen died in prison, unrepentant to the end. Edward served his sentence quietly, a broken man. The Duke of Rothwell disappeared from public life, disgraced and forgotten. But Marcus was remembered. Every year on the anniversary of his death, guards across the country stood at attention for 1 minute of silence, honoring the man who proved that even after 30 years, even against impossible odds, truth could prevail. Sarah visited his grave every year too, always on the same day, always with flowers, always with gratitude. On the 10th anniversary of his death, she brought someone new, her daughter, barely 5 years old, too young to understand most of the story, but old enough to learn the lesson. "This is Marcus," Sarah told her daughter, kneeling by the headstone. "He was the bravest man I ever met. He taught me that truth matters, that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it costs you everything." Her daughter looked at the medal mounted on the headstone. "Was he a soldier?" "No, sweetheart. He was a guard. He stood at his post for 30 years, and when he saw something wrong, he didn't look away. He didn't stay silent. He spoke up. He fought for justice. And because of him, a lot of people learned the truth about something very important." "Did he win?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "Yes, baby, he won. Not for himself. He didn't live to see it. But he won for someone else. For a king who needed someone to tell his story, for a truth that needed to be heard." She touched the headstone gently. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. For being brave, for trusting me, for showing the world that one person, standing up for what's right, can change everything." As they walked away, Sarah's daughter asked one more question. "Mommy, if you see something wrong, will you be brave like Marcus?" Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'll try, sweetheart. I'll always try. Because that's what Marcus taught me. That's what we all should do. Stand up. Speak out. Tell the truth, no matter what it costs." That night, Sarah wrote one final article about Marcus. Not about the scandal, not about the trial, but about the lesson, about courage, about integrity, about the kind of person the world needs more of. "Marcus stood at his post for 30 years, she wrote, and when his moment came, when the choice was between comfort and truth, between silence and justice, he chose the harder path. He chose truth. He chose justice. He chose to be brave. And in doing so, he reminded us all that one voice, one person, one act of courage can echo through the ages, can right a wrong, can change the world. Thank you, Marcus, for your service, for your sacrifice, for showing us what true honor looks like. May we all find that same courage when our moment comes." The article went viral, just like the first one had. But this time, it wasn't about scandal. It wasn't about royalty or conspiracy or murder. It was about something simpler, more profound, more important. It was about a guard who stood at his post, who kept his honor, who waited 30 years for the right moment, and who, when that moment came, gave everything so that truth could finally see the light. That was Marcus's legacy, not the scandal he exposed, not the queen he brought down, not the case he helped solve, but the reminder that courage matters, truth matters, justice matters, and one person standing firm can make all the difference. The guard who resigned after 30 years didn't just tell a story. He lived one. And in the end, that story taught the world something it desperately needed to remember. That heroes don't always wear crowns. Sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they stand in the shadows. Sometimes they wait a lifetime for their moment. But when that moment comes, they step forward. They speak up. They do what's right. Just like Marcus did. Just like we all should. The end.